When he finally returned, it was supposed to feel like relief. A year away had been long enough, filled with unanswered messages, vague updates, and the silence that came when weeks stretched too far. I had rehearsed the moment in my head countless times. The slam of the car door, the knock on the doorframe, the tight hug that would erase 12 months of waiting. Families hold on to such expectations as if proximity could fix everything that distance fractures. But when he stepped into the hallway, the air shifted in a way that words cannot explain. My brother's shape was familiar, his voice recognizable, yet something about him felt bent, like a mirror reflecting not the person you knew, but a version altered by unseen hands. At first, I blamed myself. Memory plays tricks when you want too much. I told myself he had simply changed, that traveling transforms people, that unfamiliar food and foreign air carve differences into faces. I thought perhaps my longing had magnified the strangeness. So I tried to see past it. He carried the same backpack he left with, scuffed on one side where a zipper always caught. His jacket was the same shade of gray, though it seemed heavier now, as if saturated with years instead of months. Still, something small gnawed. His smile didn't lift the corners of his eyes the way it used to. When he set his bags down, his movements were too measured, like someone who had learned how to act human but hadn't mastered the casual disorder of coming home. The first night, he sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed. I found him staring at nothing, hands resting perfectly still as though waiting for a signal. In childhood, he had been restless, tapping fingers, drumming on surfaces, humming when silence stretched too thin. This stillness was alien. Over the following days, I tried to convince myself that travel could explain everything. I told myself that long trips harden people, that constant motion erodes habits until only essentials remain. Yet there were gaps that explanations could not fill. He no longer remembered small things, where the silverware drawer was, which floorboard creaked in the hallway, the name of our neighbor's dog. He moved through the house like a guest politely pretending to know his way. I began noticing the way his eyes lingered on mirrors, not with vanity but with calculation, as though checking alignment, as though the reflection was not reassurance but instruction. It would have been easier if he had come back openly different, scarred, injured, or full of stories that explained his change. Instead, he seemed carefully assembled. And there is nothing more terrifying than realizing the person you loved most may now be a construction. I didn't speak of it at first. Families guard their hope tightly, and mine clung to the joy of reunion. My mother said he looked thinner, but stronger. My father said travel had given him perspective. They didn't see the way he avoided sunlight in the mornings, or how he recoiled slightly when the family dog pressed against his legs. They didn't hear the way his voice sometimes faltered mid-sentence, like he was searching for a word that once was natural, but was now only approximate. One evening, while sorting through photos from his journey, I noticed something impossible. He had shown us dozens of images, mountains, hostels, crowded markets, but in every picture where he appeared, his expression was the same, neutral, symmetrical, never laughing, never grimacing, as if pasted into each background. I stared until my chest grew tight. Even people who hide emotions cannot disguise them completely in candid shots. A person's face bends under the weight of weather, fatigue, or surprise. His did not. I told myself to let it go. The human mind can invent ghosts from shadows, and grief often arrives disguised as suspicion. But the deeper I looked, the more fractures appeared. He used to love my grandmother's soup, always slurping noisily despite warnings. Now he barely touched it, claiming he wasn't hungry. He once had a crooked scar on his left wrist, a childhood accident. When I asked to see it again, he pulled his sleeve down too quickly, saying the scar had faded. Some nights, I heard footsteps outside my door at exactly the same hour. Slow, careful, measured. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty, but the air smelled faintly of damp earth, a scent foreign to our house. What unsettled me most was not the differences, but the precision of the sameness. He was close enough to convince everyone else. Only I noticed the hesitations, the blankness, the mechanical rhythm of his routines. It felt deliberate, as if someone had studied him long enough to mimic, but not long enough to fully understand. The human heart clings to denial, but my body carried the truth before my mind would accept it. Every time he passed me in the hallway, my skin prickled with the instinct that something foreign brushed too close. It wasn't fear at first, it was mourning. Mourning for the brother who had left, and the possibility that he had never returned. One night, unable to keep the weight to myself, I searched his backpack while he showered. My hands shook as I unzipped it, expecting trinkets, souvenirs, scraps of a year lived elsewhere. What I found was emptiness. Clothes folded too neatly, tags still crisp, items that looked purchased together, not collected over time. And at the very bottom, beneath the layers, an object that made my breath stutter. A small notebook filled with symbols I did not recognize. Not words, not numbers, but shapes. Circles intersected with lines, sequences repeated with mechanical precision. It was not a travel journal. It looked more like instructions. I shoved everything back before he returned, but I could not erase what I had seen. That night, I dreamed of him standing over my bed, eyes open but unblinking, hands folded neatly as if waiting for me to stop breathing. I woke to the sound of the floorboard creaking in the hallway. The realization came quietly, with the same inevitability as winter. My brother had come back, but not the one who had left. What lived in our house now wore his shape, carried his voice, but was something else entirely. And while everyone else celebrated his return, I began counting the hours, wondering how long it would take before the rest of them noticed too. The days blurred together after that. Each morning, I woke with a pulse of dread before my feet touched the floor. The house had become a stage where only I sensed the script had changed, while the rest of my family played their roles with blind devotion. My mother laughed at his new stories, though they were always vague. Locations without names, experiences described in flat terms as though copied from a guidebook. My father praised his calmness, calling it maturity, never noticing that calmness is sometimes the mask of absence. I tried to track the inconsistencies. He claimed to have visited a coastal city, but when I asked about the smell of salt air or the taste of seafood, he answered with textbook descriptions, never the messy detail of memory. He showed me a photo of himself in front of a cathedral, but his shadow fell in the wrong direction compared to the buildings behind him. Small cracks, invisible to anyone not looking for them. I became the observer, the archivist of strangeness, my notes filled with fragments, his habit of locking the bathroom door for too long, the way he washed his hands with precise repeated motions, the mechanical rhythm of his footsteps when he thought no one was listening. Sleep became fragile. Each creak of the floorboard or whisper of movement outside my room pierced me awake. One night I heard the sound of pages turning. I crept into the hallway and saw light spilling from his room, a thin yellow strip beneath the door. My hand hovered over the handle, but I didn't dare open it. Later, when silence returned, I found the door unlocked. He was lying perfectly still in bed, arms folded across his chest like a corpse, eyes closed but too rigid, as though rehearsing stillness. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, that grief had fermented into suspicion. But then I noticed the family photos. One by one, frames were shifting, sometimes tilted slightly, sometimes placed back in the wrong order. At first, I thought it was clumsiness, but then I realized it was systematic. Every photo that showed him as a child, every image where his smile was wide and real, disappeared. Quietly, gradually, until only the newer ones remained. The horror of it was not in the disappearance, but in the silence around it. No one else noticed. Or perhaps they noticed but accepted, too numbed by relief at having him home. The emptiness of their denial was worse than any scream. I couldn't hold it inside any longer. I tested my mother one afternoon, asking if she remembered the scar on his wrist. She frowned, then shook her head, saying maybe she had imagined it. I pressed further. His favorite childhood toy, his strange fear of thunderstorms. She smiled with pity, told me travel changes people, that memory is unreliable. In her voice, I heard not certainty, but surrender. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since childhood. The sound of the latch sliding into place should have comforted me, but instead it felt like an admission. There was something in this house that required protection. The notebook haunted me. I couldn't stop thinking about the symbols, their cold geometry. I searched online for similar patterns, ancient runes, secret alphabets, mathematical formulas, but nothing matched. And yet, the sequences suggested intention, as if following a blueprint. I printed out one of the photos he had shown us and overlaid the symbols onto the background. The alignment was too precise to be coincidence, as if the notebook was not recording memories, but coordinates. Once, I caught him outside in the backyard at dawn. He was barefoot in the grass, head tilted upward, arms hanging loosely.
His lips moved, but no sound came. I stood at the window, breath fogging the glass, watching as he mouthed something over and over. The movements were too exact, like a chant stripped from voice. When he noticed me, he smiled in that careful way, then walked inside as though nothing had happened. The house no longer felt like home. It became a vessel, hollowed out by something that wore a familiar face. Every meal was an ordeal, every shared moment a performance. My parents thrived in the illusion, but I lived in the fracture between memory and presence. The breaking point came with the dog. Loyal and old, our retriever had loved my brother fiercely. But now, each time he entered the room, the dog growled low in its throat, hackles raised. One night, the dog refused to come inside, staring through the glass door with a trembling body, eyes locked on my brother. My father grew angry, but I felt only terror. Animals recognize what humans deny. When the dog disappeared the next morning, no one asked questions but me. My mother claimed it had wandered off, old age calling it to solitude. I knew better. The silence in my brother's eyes told me so. The walls of denial closed tighter. My parents dismissed my concerns as stress. Friends called me dramatic. The weight of truth isolated me, leaving me alone with suspicion. And yet the more alone I felt, the sharper my senses became. I began to notice the coldness in his skin when our hands brushed, the absence of warmth where life should be. I began to see how his reflections sometimes lagged in the mirror, a fraction of a second behind.
One night, unable to endure the gnawing dread, I slipped into his room again. The notebook lay on the desk, open this time. The symbols stretched across the page, dense and meticulous. But now there were sketches, shapes of faces, outlines of hands, diagrams of veins and muscles. They were studies, not memories, instructions for construction, not recollection. I turned the page and froze. There was my own face, drawn with precision, lines marking measurements across eyes and jaw, as though preparing to replicate. My chest constricted with the realization. He was not just replacement, he was rehearsal. I stumbled back, heart pounding so violently I feared it would wake him. But he did not stir. He lay in bed with eyes closed, chest rising and falling too evenly, like the steady breath of a machine imitating sleep. I locked my door again that night, but no latch can keep out the terror of knowing. The thought sank into me. If he had been replaced, then by whom? Or by what? And if they had already done it once, what kept them from doing it again? Days later, I noticed new notes in the notebook, different handwriting, sharper, cleaner, as though someone else had continued the work. The entries detailed habits, routines, vulnerabilities, and in the margins, my name appeared again and again, circled. Every moment became a countdown. I no longer wondered if my brother had been replaced. The question now was, how long before they came for me, too?
His head tilted slightly, in imitation of curiosity. He said nothing, but his lips moved once, forming a shape that resembled my name. No sound came out, just the shape. I fled before he could rise. My heart hammered against my ribs, but some part of me knew running could only delay what was coming. The next morning, the notebook was gone. His room looked scrubbed, unnaturally bare. But on my own desk, beneath my school books, I found a page folded neatly. On it was another drawing. My face again, more detailed, eyes shaded with disturbing precision. Beneath it, in jagged script, were 2 words, almost ready. From that moment, time unraveled. I began to feel watched even outside the house. Street lamps flickered when I passed. Reflections in shop windows lagged a fraction of a second. At night, I dreamed of voices humming from the earth, a chorus without language. Then came the night I woke to the sound of the latch sliding on my door. I had locked it before bed, I was certain, but now it opened slowly, carefully. I lay frozen, breath shallow, watching the gap widen. A shadow slipped through, his shape, but too still, too exact. He crossed the room in silence, then stopped at my bed. His hand lifted, hovering just above my face, fingers spread like a scanner. The air was thick with something electrical, humming low against my skin. I forced my body to move, to shove him back, but before I could, he lowered his hand and turned away. Without a word, he walked back into the hallway, door closing softly behind him. I sat trembling until dawn. When sunlight came, I tried to tell myself it was a nightmare, but on the mirror above my desk, drawn faintly in condensation, was the outline of my face. Not mine, exactly, slightly off, as though traced by someone who had never truly seen me, but was trying to replicate. The days after blurred into paranoia. I kept waiting for him to finish whatever phase 2 meant. My parents remained blind, treating my exhaustion as adolescent drama. Meanwhile, he moved with greater ease, his mimicry improving. Even his smile began to wrinkle his eyes, though the crease looked painted, too rehearsed.
By the time autumn sank into the streets outside, the house felt like a trap. The curtains stayed closed longer, the rooms colder. My brother, if I could still call him that, moved through the space with a patience that was unbearable. Each step measured, each gesture practiced. And with every passing day, the walls between us and the truth grew thinner. I avoided him when I could, but avoidance only sharpened his presence. His eyes followed me too often, not in suspicion, but in study, as though he was memorizing me the way a craftsman memorizes a blueprint. The comfort of family had become a performance staged around a stranger. One evening, my parents invited neighbors for dinner, eager to show off their son's safe return. The table was filled with noise, laughter, clinking glasses. My brother answered questions politely, always polite, always precise. Yet, when one guest asked about the taste of mangoes in a tropical country he claimed to visit, his answer was coldly clinical. Sweet, fibrous, orange. Not the way a person remembers food, but the way a manual might describe it. The guests chuckled, thinking it shyness. I sat frozen, the only one who understood the void in his words. Later, after the guests left, I noticed something on the floor beneath his chair. A small scrap of paper, torn from the notebook. On it were 3 words, written in the same foreign symbols I had seen before, then translated beneath in trembling handwriting. Phase 2 imminent. That night, I dreamed again of him standing over me, eyes open, lips moving in silence. Except this time, when I jolted awake, the dream had followed me. I could hear the faint hum beyond my door, a vibration too steady to belong to a human throat. I pressed my ear to the wood. The sound wasn't outside my door. It was inside his room, seeping through the wall. I felt it in my ribs like a second heartbeat. The next day, I told my parents everything about the notebook, the photos, the dog, the symbols. Their silence was worse than disbelief. My mother wept softly, not with fear, but exhaustion, and told me I needed rest. My father grew angry, saying my brother had survived a year of hardship and deserved peace. Their refusal cut deeper than knives. It was easier for them to cradle the lie than face the fracture of truth. Isolation settled heavy on my chest. I began sleeping in bursts, too afraid of the dark silence. Each time I closed my eyes, I imagined waking to find him lean over me, face too close, measuring the distance between my features. One evening when my parents were out, I gathered the courage to confront him. He was in the living room, sitting perfectly still, as though waiting for the moment. My voice trembled as I asked where the real brother had gone.
The final break came when I overheard him in the basement. I had gone down for a box of winter clothes and stopped when I heard the hum again. This time, it wasn't alone. Other voices answered, low, layered, out of sync. The basement air shimmered faintly, as though thick with heat, but the furnace was off. I crept closer until I saw him standing in the center of the room, notebook open on the floor, symbols drawn in chalk across the concrete. Around him, the air rippled like water, and from the ripple, a second figure began to emerge, shadows first, then the faint outline of a body. It was me. Or rather, something wearing the beginnings of me. Unfinished, faceless, but undeniably mine. I ran before the figure could take shape, stumbling up the stairs, lungs burning. I slammed my bedroom door and pressed my back against it, listening for pursuit, but none came. Only silence, thicker than ever, as though the house itself held its breath. I don't remember much of the next hours, only fragments. Packing a bag in the dark, stuffing it with cash and clothes, leaving through the window instead of the door. The night air was cold, but it carried no hum. Now I write this from a borrowed room, miles away, hands shaking as I replay the images in my mind. My brother never came back from his year-long trip. Something else returned in his place, wearing his skin like a costume, studying us, preparing for something larger. And whatever it was, it had begun to learn too well. The last page of the notebook still lives in my memory, burned there by fear. Beneath the symbols and diagrams, one sentence was written in plain, human words. Replication complete. Integration begins. And I can't stop wondering if my family, still sitting at that dinner table, still smiling at the imposter, even know they've already been chosen next.